Hey, 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 you Italian son of a bitch. Don't you duck me. Don't duck me. You know I'm calling. I'm calling to tell you that you're not the man I am. Just not the man I am. Comes to fantasy football. You're just not the man I am. Just say it. Say it out loud. Say it out loud. Say it. Say, Ian Matthews is more of a man than I am when it comes to fantasy football. That's right. That guy, Ian Matthews, he knows way more than I do, than I could ever know. Honestly, say it this way. Don't say it that way. Say, he knows more than I could ever know about fantasy football. That guy's learned. He's learned. Not learned. He's learned about fantasy football. And honestly, I'm just happy to be in this league because I'm learning from him. I'm learning. I learn from Ian Matthews every week. That guy, he puts together lineups to win. He's got a lineup to win. He's just a winner. Man, I'm so glad I'm friends with Ian Matthews because he's just a winner. Man, god damn, he's a winner. Oh, I went in the wrong lobby. I'm in the wrong elevator. Frank, hold on a second. I'm not the winner I thought I was. Wait, I'm back. I'm winning again. I'm back. Win elevators. Some of them go to floor 34. Some are we stopped at floor 4. What are you supposed to do? You're supposed to just know all that. But anyway, I just hope that by being in a fantasy league with me for the last 10 years and losing every year, literally every year, you've not won one championship. I just hope that you've learned a few things from me, and I know you look up to me, but I just hope that by being in a league with me, you're getting better. I just hope you're getting better. I just hope you feel like you're getting better. Because from my perspective, you don't look like you're much better. You look like you still suck at fantasy football.
You're listening to Let Me Speak to a Manager with Frank Cava and Ian Matthews.
What a crock of shit.
Yeah, that was hot mic, Sam.
You can't say God on the air.
Don't worry, nobody's listening anyway.
Do it live! I'll write it and we'll do it live!
Frankie!
Ian, you son of a bitch.
Frankie, I apologize that my voice is raspier than it normally is. It just got through with Memorial Weekend and was in Myrtle Beach, and I drank a lot of tequila with the parents of my travel baseball team, and it was a good time.
And it looks like you did wear sunscreen. I, on the other hand, am still bronzy from my trip to Miami for the IMN conference, where I conducted business at my sexiest, which is water level up to my nipples, and got a lot of business done there, Ian. It was very nice. Very nice.
I have a very good coach's tan going. If you can't tell, look at this, Frankie. That's what a coach. That's what a coach looks like right there. Just got the red neck, the red forearms. I had the jersey on all weekend. It's pretty intense. I got to get my butt into a pool without sunscreen on so I can get rid of this coach's tan.
Perfect.
So we are recording this on June 1st. It's been a interesting 2022 to say the least. At least a lot of news, a lot of back and forth, a lot of, I'd say, panic if you are an owner of stocks, specifically tech stocks, but really all stocks have had a really rough year. Probably even more panic if you are a crypto advocate and owner specifically. Definitely panic seeking into the startup world where venture capital is prevalent. Not so much panic if you're in the real estate market. In the real estate market, at least the clients that I work with, I do coaching with a couple of home builders. They couldn't be more busy. They're trying to still find people, trying to hire. And I think it's, you and I talked about it, that real estate tends to kind of be the tail of the dog. It's the last to know when there's some bad stuff going on in the market. So I think in this episode, we wanted to kind of talk about some big things that we've been reading in the news that feel like indicators that we're probably already in a recession right now, and it started. And I think we want to talk a little bit about your trip down to Florida and what you are hearing from different real estate owners, and if you think there are any indicators that you've seen in the past that should be making us a little bit nervous.
So there's a combination of things at play here. So Ian and I are having this conversation. I went and saw Top Gun Maverick over the weekend, which is fucking awesome. And some friends of ours that we went to see it with are a little bit older, and one of the guys like, "What do you think of the world right now?" And I kind of went into a specific strategy about like how I'm repositioning myself with some debt and trying to free up some cash and like do some stuff. And he's like, "Thank you for that, and thank you for being so honest." I was kind of talking more globally. He's like, monkeypox, Ukraine, the economy, inflation, and there's a lot of scary shit going on in the world. And I think Ian and I are pretty realistic with it, and I think we're also pretty early. I was having a conversation with somebody yesterday, and they were like, "Well, that's kind of like when when banks dried up last time there was a housing downturn in 2008." And I'm like, 2008 was late. Like the housing market started to show signs of problems in 2005, if you're paying attention. So you had 3 years of being able to do things. So I have most of my holdings in real estate, and I think now is a really good time to make sure you're heavy in cash, even though we're going into an inflationary period. And then Ian and I kind of, as we go through the week, we text back and forth. He saw something in the news, and I just pulled up CNBC in case I needed it for while we're in here. A headline on CNBC right now says the following: Elon Musk tells Tesla workers to return to the office full-time or resign. We didn't have that in our agenda, but we have a very similar story, a couple of them, because the market's changing. Like the sentiment of overpay for talent to get him in the door is no longer the case, because we're in the teeth of something new.
Well, and so I just heard Elon Musk. He was a keynote speaker at the All In Venture Capital. They had a 3-day summit. They had a conference, and he was one of the keynote speakers. But he was talking about for early fund. And look, Elon Musk is an awesome guy to listen to, because he has been on the verge of bankruptcy more times than Frank and I can even imagine. I mean, he's so many different times. If you hear a story with PayPal, with SpaceX, with Tesla, every business he's ever started, he's been down to like 2 weeks of payroll and just figuring out ways to get capital and just sliding into home always to beat the tag. And he was talking about, as he was talking to the folks that were at this conference, these are early stage startups. His advice to everyone is get your cash flow right. He's like, I know in the past, you just thought about hire, and when's my next raise, and how do I get sales? He was like, get your cash flow right. You want to be in control over the next couple of years. You don't want to be beholden to your next raise, because it might not be there. And so when he's telling the people at Tesla that, he's thinking about his company too, because when he says that, he's saying, we're not as efficient with you working from home. We're not as efficient with you being remote. We're a car manufacturer. We're a battery manufacturer. Get your butt to work. We're better when you're at work. We get more done. And if it doesn't work for you, tough shit. And I think that's a really good lead into a lot of things that we're starting to see in the market. Tell me that this environment has already switched to an employer's market, whereas it's been an employee's market for, I don't know, Frank, what do you say, 7-8 years? I mean, a long time it's been an employee's market.
It's been an employee's market for a while, but it's been crazy since like 2021. So like, let's go backwards a little bit, right? Pandemic happens, nobody's quitting because everyone's afraid. Like Ian and I were sending texts to each other. Like usually the unemployment claims are like somewhere between 200 and 400,000. That's normal. And there was like 10 million in one report in March or April of 2020. It's like, holy shit, this has gone up by a factor of 50. Like since the dawn of time, that's never happened. So you had this thing where everybody who had a job was like hunkered in and didn't want to go anywhere if they hadn't gotten fired. And then there was some smart people who were like, well, I'm working from home. My company's not really good at managing me. Some of those people actually went out and found a second job and were like half-time at 2 jobs because of the fact they were talented enough to kind of pull it off. So that's 2020. And then 2021 comes up and it turns into the great resignation, right? And so like that started to happen. The other thing that was crazy is construction people. Like I own a construction company. Like never are construction like managers, people educating, like not necessarily people swinging hammers, but people on the other end of the spectrum who manage, they never are in the catbird seat where you can actually demand. And they were in such demand and they have never been there. So like the way that I look at it, it's been kind of a nutso market for 12 to 18 months where it's like PTO is up for debate, salaries are nuts. There's all these crazy things that people were just throwing at them. And I remember telling you, I'm like, this is not sustainable. Like this won't last.
So we're going to go through a number of points that kind of, you read the paper every day, you watch the news, and rarely does anything stop you in your tracks and think, that's different. And we're going to try to touch on a few of those stories that I feel are very different with some big companies. And then we're going to try to relate it down to smaller businesses, both of our businesses, which we're dealing with right now, things that we're seeing and dealing with. So the first one for me, anyone that follows Netflix knows that Dave Chappelle had a stand-up comedy special called The Closer that sparked a ton of controversy, both outside of the company and inside of the company. And in that special, Dave Chappelle pretty much took the gloves off and went after the LGBT community. And mainly, he went after the trans community. So a lot of jokes. He did what comedians do. He made fun of specific group. And this one he really went after, and largely because they kind of came after him and told him he couldn't. And it really offended a lot of people within the Netflix organization and really kind of rank and file employees. And to the point where they wanted Netflix to cancel Dave. They wanted to take it off. It was offensive to them. They wanted it gone. And the CEO of Netflix, Ted Sarandos, was under a lot of pressure because his first response was kind of blunt. It was kind of like, well, that's just comedy. And everyone really didn't like his response to it. And so employees walked out. They had a walkout. They protested. The leader of this walkout went as far as to bring a list of demands that they expected from Sarandos and Netflix that they were asking for. And I think to a large extent, Netflix did everything they could to try to quell the rebellion, to try to calm people down, to try to listen to what they had to say. But they never did take Chappelle off. They never did take The Closer off.
I want to say something real quick. This is relevant. The Closer came out on October 5th of 2021. So as we're recording this, it was 8 months ago. And a lot can happen in 8 months. And 8 months ago, the market was still nutso. People were still demanding things, and it's changing.
Yep. And so I think largely he retracted a lot of his early statements, tried to listen, tried to appease a lot of different people within the company, tried to calm them down, but he never did quite take them off. But their approach, I would say, was relatively, I wouldn't say it was harsh. They're a big company trying to make money. Even though they left Chappelle up, I think they tried to.
In my opinion, they tried to prioritize the employee. They were not dealing with like fascist Germany. They were very much in a way of, we want to satisfy people here, job security, or the quality of employment, that type of stuff actually matters at that time.
I think they were sensitive to their
Correct.
employees' demands, or at least sensitive to the way they felt. We hear you, we're listening. They did a bunch of town halls.
Focus
They
groups.
They did some some sessions where people could give direct feedback to the executives in the company. They really listened. So that is not that happened last year. The news that I found very interesting is Netflix just came out, and they had their Q1 results came out. They had their first decline in subscribers in more than a decade. And Netflix stock has just been destroyed in the last 6 months. They lost billions of dollars of value. If you own that stock 2 years ago and you own it today, you have at least half is gone. And that's a different position that the company executives are in now. When they were trying to appease, they were still growing, growth mode, adding employees, get as much content as you can. They didn't want to lose people. Today, they're under a lot of pressure from shareholders of what are you going to do to grow profit, earnings. And so they came out, the news comes out that they updated their Netflix culture memo. And the Netflix culture memo is a big deal. You've seen before their 100-page PowerPoint on what Netflix is and what they expect of employees. We've even talked about it on the show before. It's kind of an iconic HR guide that's been looked at 21 million times. But they updated it, and there's a section in it, a new section called artistic expression that's in there. And this kind of explains that Netflix is not going to censor any specific artists or voices, and even if employees consider the content offensive. And it very bluntly states, as employees, we support the principle that Netflix offers a diversity of stories, even if we find some titles counter to our own personal values. Depending on your role, you may need to work on titles you perceive to be harmful. And then this is the statement that's really tough. If you'd find it hard to support our content breadth, Netflix may not be the best place for you. In essence, what Netflix is saying is, we released something that was incredibly popular, that was number one, by the way, on our streaming service, which was Dave Chappelle. You didn't like it. You threw a fit. We listened. In the future, we're not going to listen. We're going to just terminate you if you have a problem. If you come out and you protest, if you do anything, they're coming out and saying, we're going to produce content that people like, and we're going to do it within the law. And if you can't get around that, you shouldn't work here, and we don't give a shit.
There's not a lot to add there, right? We're a for-profit business, and we have shareholders. And when you go public and you have shareholders, you are beholden to shareholders. The CEO will lose his job if he does not represent the shareholders in the best possible way. That's why there's a board, and that's why there's people be elected. Like these things are real. So I pulled up the chart while you were talking just to have a couple of contextual themes. The 52-week high, which happened about the same time Dave Chappelle was very unpopularly dominating, was $700 a share. At their 52-week low is 162. It's a little higher than that now. But if you put that in perspective, which I think is worth doing, the market cap at that point in time was 311 billion. And now it's 1/5 of that. Like that matters. Like that matters a lot. There's a lot of pissed off shareholders that are out in the world if that is in fact what's happened to your pricing in that period of time. So like we want to prioritize the people that work here, but the real master is profits.
You and I both worked for a CEO that on a regular basis reminded us that our priorities as a company are shareholders 1, customers 2, employees 3. He used to remind us of that all the time. You start putting employees ahead of shareholders and customers, you won't have either of the first two. And I think that's Netflix is saying right now, guys, there is no company. We cannot afford to pay any salaries without customers and without shareholders. That's how we get financed to run a business. We are a business. We are not a charity. And he goes on to say, the CEO goes on to say here in this document, while every title is different, we approach them based on the same set of principles. We support artistic expression of the creators we choose to work with. We program for a diversity of audiences and tastes, and we let viewers decide what's appropriate for them versus having Netflix censor specific artists or voices. And I love that. Another thing our CEO, our chairman, used to say to us all the time in a company Frank and I was in is, we don't make the market, we serve
the market.
We serve the market. And he used to say that, we built homes. So he would say, doesn't matter what you like. Doesn't matter what you like. Doesn't matter what you think. It matters what people will pay. It matters what people will pay for. That is what we're going to build. That's the product we're going to make. And what Netflix is saying here is, we are going to go serve the market. If the market wants content from Dave Chappelle that may be offensive to some, but it's profitable, we're going to serve the market, and you may not like it, and you should go. And that's a big change from the way companies are running in an employee market. This is Netflix saying, we're in a bad place now. And honestly, we're not hiring as many people as we used to. So if a few of you leave, it would kind of help our earnings results anyway.
Yep. There's two things that I want to kind of say as we kind of close out this section. This is the definition of free market capitalism. It's what it is. Like that's what it looks like. When you need to kowtow to get people in the door, you do. Right now, my guess is unemployment will start to tick up. Good people who work at bad companies will be the first people on the street. And the first couple of rounds of layoffs at big companies are pretty easy. Like, we're going to get into some statistics in a minute of some other blue chippers who have added staggering numbers of employees who will find themselves unemployed at some point in the not too distant future. In addition to something, while we're talking about comedy, this is a podcast. This is supposed to be fun and enjoyable. I will say the following. George Carlin is one of my all-time favorites, long since dead. But he has a 4-hour special on HBO. And if you haven't seen it, you have to. It is awesome. Like, there's a comparison between George Carlin and the Beatles. Like, the Beatles came out on the Ed Sullivan Show and they were in ties, they were all dressed up, and they became counterculture. George Carlin went through the same kind of thing, and he came out about the same time. He's about the same age as those guys. And it went through the iterations that it takes to be on top with comedy for 5 or 6 decades. My dad loved George Carlin. I loved George Carlin as a kid. It's awesome. And the other thing that's really cool about it is, like, all our favorites, like Seinfeld's in there, Chappelle's in there. Bill Burr is like quoted several times. So if you like comedy, it's worth watching.
George Carlin is the man. I'm gonna have to check it out. I haven't seen it.
It's really good, Ian.
So another thing that I've been hearing a lot of over the last couple of years that Frank and I have both thought was complete bullshit is that COVID changed the way employers and employees work together forever. That remote work was here to stay. Employees were going to have the power. And I've never quite believed this. For one, I thought there were a lot of like young people that would get tired of that pretty quick, because it's pretty hard to develop and grow in your career if you're on Zoom calls all the time. Like, that's how young people learn, is by being in offices and observing and being around. But I also know that it's just less productive, period. It's less productive. So something came out over the last couple of months, and there's been a number of these, but I'm going to talk about Apple and Google. So Apple came out and said, we're going to mandate that people come back to work 3 days a week. They called it a pilot, but it was a mandate. It was a mandate. You're going to come to the office Monday, Tuesdays, and Thursdays. Wednesdays and Fridays are your flex time. You can decide what you want to do. And they put it down. And Tim Cook, the CEO, sent the memo out to everyone saying, this is the way we're going to do it. Now, Apple has a lot of their employees out on the West Coast. They're not as spread out as Amazon or some other big companies. A lot of people in the same place. So it's more efficient. It's more effective when people are around and working in groups. Came out and did it. So a very high level executive in the company, Ian Goodfellow, he's a director of machine learning. When this came out, he threatened to quit. He said, my team, I'm not with this. It's not fair. And this just a couple of months ago, I'm leaving.
Let me add something real quick. This is the kind of person who most organizations and most employees think irreplaceable. This is someone who the company can't stand to lose this person.
Genius level, like very smart guy,
how do we live without him?
Thought to be a very big part of their machine learning group, which is a big part of their future growth in the company. So this is not a peon. This is not a low-level manager. This is a guy whose brain is worth a lot of money to Apple. But he came out and said this, and I think he thought he was kind of standing up for his team, and Apple said, "You going to put that in writing?" And they took his resignation, and they didn't hesitate, and they reiterated their stance. This policy might not be for everyone. For those that it's not with, you're not with it, put in your resignation. And I think the fact that Apple is doing this, because the big tech companies were some of the first to come out and say, hey, we're cool. This was a recruiting thing. You can work from wherever you want and work for us because we're a tech company. So, and Apple was one of the ones that said, you don't need to come in. We got COVID. But for Apple, the biggest of the big dogs in tech, to come out and say, no, you're coming back. And a lot of the people that work at Apple have said this pilot is really just a precursor to they're going to say everyone's got to work 5 days a week again at Apple. And I think that's maybe what even had this Ian Goodfella is upset, but he's out of the company. Apple was like, doesn't work for you, fine, we'll find someone else to do your job. We're Apple, you're some dude. And Apple's not the only one. So Google.
Let's dive into this first with Goodfellow, and then let's move into the next one. I think this is worth talking about. A couple things. First of all, during the pandemic, like when vaccines were out and people, you weren't going to implode by interacting with another human. Goldman Sachs came out and said the following: if you're under 35 years old and you're not coming to the office every day, you're nuts. The reason for that is there's really smart people who work at Goldman Sachs who are walking the halls of the office. And there is something to culture and impromptu conversations that happen in an office that is irreplaceable and cannot be replicated in Zoom. Zoom is a wonderful tool, but at the same time, it is not the same. The amount of meetings that I have been in my life that have happened because I bumped into somebody in a hallway or on my way to the bathroom, or I pop into an office and it turns into a 3 or 4 hour session where we whiteboard stuff, they happen a lot. And I think there's incredible value there of being in the office. I want to pivot to a different point after that, but anything to add there, Ian, or do you agree?
God, I couldn't agree more with that. I mean, my entire career, I learned everything by being in. That's how new managers, every time you move up, you got that Peter principle about to happen. You're always in meetings with guys a little more senior than you or gals more senior than you. And you just learn by listening and watching the way they make decisions. You don't get any of that on virtual, on remote. You might get a little better at something, individual contributor wise, but to really grow and to emulate other people, you got to be around them. You have to see it.
There's a few periods in my life where I don't like to use the word depressed, but maybe I was depressed or I was certainly not at my peak. Those moments happened to me when I was isolated. When I lived in Charlottesville, like I didn't have a great support system around me. I quit my job. This was just starting. Like I was really low. Even though I had my son and my wife at home during COVID, like couldn't interact with people, like my mood was worse from being away from the office.
How long did Kava companies go virtual?
We were virtual for at least 6 months before we started getting back together. But it was like, 3 to 6 months where it was like completely virtual. And then we started to like dabble a little bit.
Then you had some people that kept coming in every day, right?
I did, but like those people were pissed that other people were coming in because they didn't have the office all to themselves. Like it was like this but it was 3 months. And then within about 90 days, when you start to get a little bit more data and you realize, okay, this really doesn't kill healthy people. We kind of knew who was negatively impacted by it. We started to kind of branch into the office, but we did remote work where everybody would work a rotating schedule. We still do some of that today. I've got a 7,500 square foot office opening in the not too distant future. There will be a conversation with our staff of, we have a beautiful new office. We expect to see you there. Because I do agree, there are a very special few people who can work remote and be very productive. Most people are more productive while you're here. The other side of this, Ian Goodfellow. I quit NBR and I was in my low 30s. Ian quit in mid to high 30s. And both of us, when we quit, we're pretty high up. What happened? The company did just fine. Stock didn't come down. Nothing really happened. They replaced me. They replaced me when I left with someone who's still in that job. I don't think is as strong as me. Company profits might have dipped a smidge in that one division. Doesn't matter. Company kept going. So one of the things that I've learned recently in the last 6 to 12 months, if you have an employee at a small business who you think is irreplaceable, fire them. They have too much power over you. If you are a business owner and you are beholden to someone, don't be. And what I have seen time and time again, Ian and I've talked about this. I've been scared about losing people. And were there a couple of shitty months? Yep. Did I work harder, work on weekends, work later, stress out? Yeah. But what happened? Found new people, re-energized different things, got back into things myself personally. And what ended up happening is, in the end, we're stronger because of it. So if you feel beholden to somebody and you're not a big business, I encourage you to go the Apple route. See you later, Ian. Not Matthews, my compadre, good fellow, because that is what happened. They have plenty of people behind this person who will step up and want to raise up. And as we go into a recession, you're going to see that. You don't just pick all the top people in the highest roles. You pick people with, we've talked about this here. You pick people who have the most upside, who are the most bought in, who are going to help you survive and do well. And that's the type of market that I think we're going into.
And if you work for a big company and feel like you have some kind of leverage, you don't.
Do not.
Frank and we saw our founder of our company step back from being the CEO and go run the Redskins and goof around. He kind of just disappeared from the company. He called himself chairman, but he wasn't doing anything for 10 years. He was gone. And the company just rolled along. I saw 3 or 4 CFOs. I saw presidents come and go over the biggest operations of the company. Nothing happened. Just the next guy filled in. And, if you ever get a sense of self-importance, I can't think of anyone in that company that if they left today, I would want to go sell all my stock. It just keeps rolling on because it's a machine. So don't think that you are so powerful that your company will give a damn if you leave. It won't. And if you're trying to, I'm going to go stick it in my company, you're not. The company doesn't care. It will only hurt you if you do it for some other reason other than financially it benefits you. So don't ever think that it's worth dying on some hill, because the company will be happy for you to die on the hill and it'll move on.
One of the things that's about, so Ian talked big business, I'll talk smaller. Smaller businesses kind of go through what's called valleys of death. Valley of death is 5 employees, 15 employees, 50 employees. So if you have under 5 employees and you're beholden to somebody, you're pretty much screwed because you don't have enough people to fill in. So you'll probably lose a segment of business. If you get to about 15, I would tell you that you have enough people on your staff, or if you have a cancer, you're doing more harm to your staff by holding on to that person than letting them go. And what you'll see with 14 other people is they will rally and they will help you get through it. And when you get to a point where I'm at with 50, it's very different, because now you look at it like people will come to you and say, I would rather this person not be here, and I'll do more because it's just not the environment I want to be in. But I think we covered this from all angles.
Yeah,
but
I think that's great. I think that's great. And the other big company that came out and they did this a little bit differently. So Google, they are requiring that people come back to work in certain areas, but they are offering some full-time remote work positions. So everyone's like, look at Google when they're talking about Apple. Well, here's the big caveat. Google also rolled out internally a new internal calculator that drops your pay if you are going to go work remotely somewhere that's not in San Francisco or New York or some of their big expensive offices. So for example, if you wanted to move from San Francisco to Lake Tahoe and take a fully remote position, they are going to ask you to take a 25% pay cut. So you're some low-level engineer at Google making $150,000, which is a low-level engineer. It's like an entry-level position there. So you're making 150 grand. You got to drop to 112,000 if you want to go take a remote position. So they're saying, okay, some of you can work remote, but that is Google putting a tangible dollar amount on what they think happens for your productivity. They are saying, we think you are that much less valuable when you are remote than if you are in the mother hub with the team working fully, even though it doesn't cost us anymore for you to work remote in different places. We're going to make it painful enough because we know the value of you being in the office. And I think that is just a precursor for Google to do what Apple's doing, which is just saying, we don't have that position anymore, fully remote. Get your ass to the office if you want to work here. So to me, those are both just really good examples of the market is turning, where big companies are saying, you don't like it, go work somewhere else. We're not dying for people anymore. We're kind of overstaffed because the recession's already started.
Yes. What I will add to that is exactly this. Employers, even small ones like me, know that people aren't as productive when they're not in the office. They need a good excuse to put their backbone up and say, we're not going to stand for that anymore. And this is that time. And you're picking the people who are going to be on your life raft by saying the qualifications of being here are you must come in every day. And people will start to look at that because the market's going to soften, and that's going to be something that's pretty big.
I'm going to go one step farther here. So Frank's business, a lot of his employees, you can do it remotely. There's software, there's ways to interact. There's, he's much more productive with them in the office, but they survived. I'm wearing my Keep shirt. When COVID happened, you just said the valleys of death. I think we maybe had 5 engineers outside of David at the time. It was a small team when it happened. We took no weeks off. Everyone kept coming to the office. And the reason is we were inventing a mechanical product. You had to test it. Guys had to work, interact together, get things done. We could not have done it remotely. So it was either, for us, Frankie, it was go out of business, burn all of the investors' cash that we had just raised, and just try to wait this thing out, or keep trying to invent a product. But the first wasn't an option. So people wore masks, they came to work. It's Atlanta now, thankfully. It's the South. The South didn't take, I don't think we'd have been able to do it if we had an office in New York or Chicago or San Francisco, because just politically there was a divide. But I really like what you said about small companies. We were a small company. We couldn't, there wouldn't have been something for you to do at home so much. Like, you could do some remote work, but we needed to be there with our hands on the product. And it was a matter of life or death for us to keep coming in.
I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction, and this is it. I used the moniker or the saying several times during COVID. There was a lot of bad companies with good people. And what I think happens with a company is Keep needed strong leadership. And strong leadership was, we got to come to the office. And you're going to understand pretty quickly, I can or I cannot work here. And you're going to deal with that. But you'd rather have a slightly smaller team of people all together in the best element for them. And you adjust to that. And that's what Keep did. What we did in our business is we made sure people were comfortable. There was a period where everybody was in masks. There were all kinds of things. But as the market continued to change and iterate, and we were in a place where construction workers were essential. So we had you had to be very mindful of what was happening, and you had to adjust to it. What's happening now, it's not masks, it's the economy. Janet Yellen just came out and said inflation isn't transitory. No shit. We know.
No shit. Thanks, Janet.
Someone literally siphoned gas from my wife's minivan while she was the pediatricians a few weeks ago. I told this to one of my friends. He goes, in the Tony neighborhood where you're going, and it's happening around us, and the pressures are starting, but businesses start to feel them. So with good leadership, what you realize is we have to make a decision for the business to survive and thrive. And what you realize is sometimes people come with you and sometimes people don't. But the betterment of the company, in the case of Netflix, in the case of Google, in the case of a small company like Keep or Mine, what you have to decide is we need to survive, and we have to make good choices. And what I think happens is that's where leadership is, and that's where you're going to ultimately survive and thrive. And if you don't make these choices, if you cower away from them, if you don't commit, you'll become a victim of it instead of someone who's leading it.
Tony, neighborhoods in Richmond are like the safe neighborhoods in Detroit. Oh, I always like to say that to Frank. Another story around another giant. And the reason we are talking about giants is because, make no mistake, they're the kingpins of the economy. What the big guys are doing, everyone follows, period. That's just the way.
And say this right here. The big guys are big for a reason. They're really good or have an incredible product or service, and they're also smarter. They don't have, Amazon has, I don't remember the number. Did we just look at it, like 275,000 employees or something like that? It's a big number.
1.62 million employees.
Okay, they have 1.62 million. So what that leads me to believe is they have enough money to hire really smart people who say, go be smart. And what they do, like I have 40 something. So like they're smarter than us. They see things faster. They analyze it faster. They're able to process it faster.
They're two steps ahead of a small guy.
Or more.
You have more data. You have more data. You have more data,
Yeah.
More data points, more employees, more. Their hands are involved in so many different markets. They see trends way before guys
Correct.
like you and I would. They're always two steps ahead of you. So I think it's always instructive, to pay attention to what they're doing and what their CEOs are saying. So Amazon came out and missed earnings in 2 of the past 3 quarterly reports. And the last one they missed big and didn't really warn the streets. So their stock got crushed. So you want to talk stock prices? They hit a high of around $3,700 6 months ago, and they got down to as low as 2,000. So for that company, it was the largest company on the planet, but that's close to $1 trillion off of a market cap. That's pretty crazy number. But they leading up to all that, Amazon had doubled the size of its logistics capacity in a 2-year period, which Amazon is already the largest logistics company ever created. And then they doubled in 2 years, which is, for me, that's nuts. And they did it all really starting in the COVID timeframe. And they got to a place where they were opening a new warehouse, Frankie. They were opening and Amazon warehouses are massive. They're not small warehouses. They were opening a new warehouse in the United States roughly every 24 hours. Every 24 hours, a whole warehouse would open from Amazon. So they come out and they say, look, here we are missing another earnings report. And the quote from their CEO was, our teams right now are squarely focused on improving productivity and cost efficiencies throughout our entire fulfillment network. So that is CEO speak of, we're about to start laying off some people and cutting a bunch of real estate out of our business, right? And look, you don't get to be CEO of Amazon. And by the way, these are like 2 of the first 3 quarters with Jeff Bezos not at the helm. So here's the new CEO. Jeff Bezos just had this amazing run, and he's a smart dude. He clearly went to chairman right when he knew they were going to have some shitty quarters coming up, right? That's what our chairman did. He got out right before he knew the shit was going to hit the fan. So the new guy's got to come get on these calls and say, we're missing earnings, when my predecessor went 20 years without missing earnings reports. And here I am missing them. That guy's got an ego. He's not going to come in there and screw up on the cost side. Now, he can't control, to an extent, the top line. You can't control revenue. If demand drops for Amazon products, for Amazon services, you can't control that. What the CEO is not going to do is keep missing on the bottom line. He is not going to come in there and keep saying, and they came out and said, we're overstaffed. They went out, they raised wages, they paid big bonuses for new hires. They were, willing to send out half-empty vans just to make sure customers got their packages on time. They were inefficient because everything was about growth. Everything was about sales. Everything was about taking market share from FedEx and UPS. But now that they're getting crushed in those areas, mark my words, they are going to reduce headcount by a lot, and they're going to rein in all of their op expenses. That's just going to happen. And when you're Amazon, and they hired roughly like 800,000 people over the past 2 years alone.
That was the number, right?
1.62 million workforce. They have a lot of expenses they can take out like that. And when you get to be that big and you hire that many people, Frankie, we talk about this all the time. Even if you're a great interviewer, hiring's 50-50. It's 50-50. So how many people did Amazon hire out of that 800,000 that if they went and objectively looked at it, they're only keeping them on board because they're desperately needed people to grow at that pace? It will be their first round of layoffs might be 200,000, 300,000 is going to be easy. They're going to just go through and be like, all right, guys, tell me all the morons you wish you could have hired when we were too busy. Give me all the names. Let's get rid of them. They're not going to miss on bottom line. They're going to just sweep through and clean house.
So Amazon clearly runs a more complicated business than Ian or me by a factor of, I'm not sure, but it's certainly more than one. But a few things that you look at. What are you spending on marketing and advertising? What's your payroll? What's your non-essential spend? What's R&D? When there's a recession, you look at R&D, like research and development. What are the things that we want to do that we don't necessarily have to do? So those are usually three pretty big items on anybody's P&L. First one is, are we spending money on our advertising? And if that's the case, can we cut it? Payroll in my business is higher than my marketing spend. And that's one of the places you go to first to look. It's like, how could we be like, how do we get tighter here? And you've heard of terms like reductions in force, and like all the major corporations follow these things because it's not terribly complicated. There's only so many things you need to do. And we're kind of putting this out as a warning right now. If you said, why are you guys talking about this right this minute? If you're on the fringe of being kept at a business, now's the time to work hard, to dive in, to really commit to getting better. The company needs you. The economy.
Get on board with the company's trying to do, the initiatives. Now is not the time to start pouting because someone moved your cheese and it's not the same way at what this company's changed. Yeah, it's changed. It's going to change even more. There's going to be belt tightening. There's going to be policies you don't like. They're going to get real focused on expenses, whereas maybe in the past they would have ignored it because everyone's just growing. It's time to get on board if you want to keep your job. If you don't want to keep your job, don't listen to any of this, but you better get on board, because that's the first people that I got rid of, is people that I had to sell all the time on why they needed to change.
The other thing is this: if you're great and you're at the wrong company, quit now. Most companies are still looking. Like there's another article up right now about how unemployment's growing, but there's still not enough workers. Like now's a good time to reset if you're great. But when you get to where you're going, dive in with both feet. Don't give anybody any thoughts or excuses. Show your value very, very quickly, because if you do that, like you'll be looked at as an essential person. But now's one of those moments where it's like, make sure you're on the right boat. And if you are on the right boat, show your value, because these are those moments where like what happens. I can talk about this when we were at NBR. We had different experiences. Ian and I were different departments, but here's what happens. Company's going through some changes. You're a manager. If you're in the room, it means you're not getting fired, but you look around like you didn't see somebody. You're like, yeah, we're firing him in 3 days. Like, so that's real. And then what you do is you do what's called force ranking, and you go through every single employee and every single position, and you rate people from the beginning to the bottom, from the top to the bottom. And you know, like, who are the people that we need to have? If we need to run at 50% or 60% or 70%, where are we eliminating? That's the process. And it's the process everywhere. Ian kind of talked about it, about, well, who don't you like? This is the process. So it's up to you, if you work someplace, to continue to show value and to continue to add to making the company become indispensable. And if you're indispensable going into one of these, what tends to happen is insane reward on the other side of it.
But I think, Frankie, and we can end on the Amazon thing after this, but I think the reason why Amazon, these comments and these earnings reports are so important, and I love something you just said when you talked about R&D. Let's even go, R&D is kind of wishful thinking for companies that are growing, but when you're as big as Amazon, you have a CapEx budget. CapEx is capital expenditures, investments you're making. So when you're growing like crazy, you might have a really big CapEx line item, which is we're going to upgrade our software. We're going to upgrade our distribution systems. We're going to put robots in some of our warehouses that with barcode scanners, and we're going to hire autonomous driving forklifts that don't even need employees on them that move around.
I'm going to give you something even better. It's more relatable to everybody else. In the last recession, gas prices were insanely high, and people were like, "I'm going to go buy a Prius." And I'm like, "Get an oil change the tires, and ride that van into the ground."
Yes.
Like the amount that you're going to spend saving gas by buying a brand new Prius is it's not even close to what you're going to save if you just take that old van and run into the ground.
So CFOs on a CapEx project, Frankie, a CFO is typically looking at 12 to 18 month payback. If I go spend $1 million on a new crane system, am I going to get my $1 million back in some kind of a return? And how are you going to calculate that? Within 12 months. Well, all those CapEx projects are now going to go to, you better show a return of 9 months, 6 months, 3 months. And if you're not hitting those hurdles, what's going to happen is they won't spend the money. Well, the pin action of that, Frank, is the guy who sells the crane didn't sell a crane this year. And then the crane company went and had to lay people off because they don't have enough revenue. And it reverberates through the entire economy because big companies like Amazon quit spending at the rate they were before. They don't buy that software package. They don't buy that crane. They don't buy those new forklifts that need to be upgraded because they're doing exactly what Frank's saying. Let's let our Amazon vans run a little longer. Let's not buy new vans. But then here's where it starts to hit the real estate market. They don't have demand. They're not out looking for a new warehouse every day. And that demand was pushing prices up in the market, and it was getting everyone else chasing. Now they're going to go beat up all those landlords and negotiate the rates down, or they're going to threaten to leave to get out. They're going to sublet to other people. All of that stuff hasn't even started working its way through the economy. Amazon just came out a month ago and said, we're surprised by how badly we did, but we'll be better. We're going to reduce our expenses. So we haven't even started to see Amazon's problems reverberate. When you are a multi-trillion-dollar business who is in a panic mode about reducing expenses, those bowling pins are going to be flying around for the next 12 months, which tells me we are just at the start of a recession because all of these big companies are going to be cutting CapEx, cutting R&D, cutting employees, cutting their thirst for new real estate, and that is going to reverberate all through the economy.
Yep. So one of the things I think, well, I'm going to end this segment on this one. So if you go back and you look during the last recession, there was a book and ultimately a movie that came out, and it was called Too Big to Fail. And if you've ever seen the movie, it's pretty awesome because the guy who played Danny Noonan in Caddyshack, his name is Michael O'Keefe, is in a meeting, and he goes like, he does this, he goes like, gives a wave, and he waves at somebody, and they're talking about all the banking problems and all the bank problems, Wells Fargo, Bank of America, Citi, everybody, all these problems. There's a team, there's a company who sponsors the most popular soccer team in the world, and I'd never heard of them, and they're called AIG. And what happened eventually is AIG comes out and it's this big mess that nobody saw coming, a $1 trillion mess. And it happened because other dominoes fell. So what Ian and I are talking about is get your house in order. It's early. I was talking to Ian about this earlier. I was talking to somebody about the banking fall last time, and that the housing, you had 3 years between when like Lehman Brothers fell and there were signs. Like, now's the time to be incredibly proactive, be ahead of it. It's coming. It could change. And if it does, pivot again. But what it's looking like is we're trending in that direction, and big things and big shoes are going to fall.
And it's easy to hear us talking about, say, Amazon doesn't affect me. Like, what Amazon's doing doesn't affect me. I think my point here is, if Amazon were to try to go reduce their expenses by 20%, it would affect every American in some way, no matter what industry you're in, period. It affects the hotel industry, it affects transportation industry, it affects the real estate industry. Frank and I own properties across the street from a big Amazon warehouse that was just added in the past couple of years. It impacts everything. And so and if they are just now saying they're having problems and they're going to cut expenses, we're just at the beginning of kind of a buckle in and figure this out over the next 12 to 18 months, where it could be a really tough economy.
Make no mistake, all the companies we just talked about, maybe Netflix aside, but Amazon, Google, Apple, they've got their hand on the whip. They've got their hand on the whip.
Yeah.
And when that whip starts moving, someone's going to get hit with the back end of it. The business end of it is the loose end, not the one with the handle. They're controlling it, and there's going to be reverberations. Like Alistair talked about that when he came on the podcast about the whip handle. Like, it happens.
That's exactly right.
All right, Ian. So we took our first Joe Rogan break, just without the weed. If you ever listen to the Joe Rogan podcast, he takes pregnant pauses. It's been a day for those of you that are loyal watchers and not listeners. Ian and I are back and better than ever.
With the wardrobe change, I feel like Diana Ross. I changed wardrobes. I kept the same hat on, but I have a different Nike shirt on, and I put on glasses. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you're like, whoa, these guys changed wardrobes just mid-show.
It's kind of like that time you came down to my house for Thanksgiving and I had 3 different outfits on. You kept calling me Diana Ross.
Yeah. Why, speaking of Joe Rogan, why don't we do weed breaks? Why don't, can we start that? Can we start doing weed breaks?
So I've got an artist doing a new rendering on one of my walls, and the other day he was just sitting there rolling a joint in front of my 3-year-old. I'm like, all right, time to go home.
Damn, what's that smell?
Crap.
It's just patchouli oil. He's an artist. That's what they're into.
That's it. Roll them up.
So another data point out of all of these big companies. So Walmart, Target, Costco, they all got really crushed because their quarterly earnings came out and they were lousy just the same. But Walmart's was a really big one because Walmart is just known as a very disciplined company that gets ahead of things. And obviously Walmart is Walmart because they have some of the lowest costs on the planet for any retailer. But they had a big earnings miss, and their CEO kind of said, look, we had unexpected bottom line results, and we think this is an unusual environment, meaning this economy is worse than we thought it was, and our input costs were incredibly high. CEO also came out for Walmart, and he said that, I think this one's a little weird, Frank. I don't know if these folks were on leave, but he said that they had more employees return from COVID leave quicker than expected, and it caused the company to become overstaffed during a big part of the quarter, which I found that was just interesting that you could get surprised by that. I would have thought they were kind of managing the schedule of which that happens. Obviously, you pay less for people that there's probably a period of leave they could be on, and then the rest is a personal leave. That's how it's always was for big companies when I worked there, is you kind of had a paid leave, and then if you got past a certain point, then it was personal leave where the company only paid for a small chunk, and that was the company had to approve it. So maybe they had just approved longer leaves. But he said that those scheduling challenges, they think they've been resolved. But when they're talking about when a company as big as Walmart, 1 million plus employees, thousands of locations involved in every community around the country, when they come out and say they have unexpected bottom line results and unusual input costs, what that means is immediately after reporting that awkward and uncomfortable earnings report for the CEO, who has to then do a conference call with analysts asking them lots of questions about why didn't you see this coming, they're having a meeting with the top executives in the company. They probably already had multiple, but they're having one, and he's saying, get your shit together. Go get your costs lower, get on your suppliers, and if you can't get your costs lower, take people out. They're not going to get on a second call and say, we were overstaffed for a large part of the quarter. Is there any chance that happens 2 quarters in a row, Frank? Them saying we're overstaffed? There's zero chance that a good CEO of Walmart is not going to say that. It'll happen once, it won't happen twice. And that happened the last quarter. So what's happening right now is they're laying people off. They're slowing the pace of hiring. People that are asking for raises are not getting it. They're doing everything within their control to lower their costs, which impacts Americans. That impacts the average people. And then those folks are feeling stressed now, and they're going to spend less. So these are consumers. Walmart workers are also American consumers. They spend less. Their supply chain is getting beat up. So when the supply chain gets beat up, that they got a lower cost, they're forced to eat some of their higher input costs. So they lay people off. So there's this pin action, this chain of events that ravages through the economy that is just starting. That I think that's the point we're both trying to make here. These are recent earnings reports in May, and it's just starting, that it's starting to seep through the rest of the economy, and it will be for the next 3, 6, 9 months.
So the beauty of taking a break overnight is this: Elon Musk is the gift that keeps on giving. Last night, there was an awesome quote that Ian and I were going back and forth on that I'm going to read to you now. Elon Musk tells Tesla employees to return to office. Inside of the article, here was our favorite line: these people should pretend to work somewhere else. So it talks about.
He was asked, what if you have a bunch of people say that they're going to quit because you made them come back to the factory? He not only, so I love this, Frank. Frank sent this to me last night. We were going back and forth. We were giggling. We're both big Elon Musk fanboys. Everything about him is amazing. If I was the richest man on the planet, I only hope I would stay as raw and cool as that guy. He never went corporate. All he talks
about now is the days when he used to sleep on the floor. He's like, you need to have face-to-face action with your people. They need to know you're working. Like, you need to, like, he keeps talking about, like, 4 years ago, my guess is he probably had 15 houses and he was sleeping on the floor in a factory.
But he's frustrated, man, because Tesla can't ship product. They can't get, people are on waiting lists that are going back 2, 3, 4 years. David,
I know.
David with Keep, he's got one of the founders edition Teslas he's waiting on. He's been waiting for 2.5 years. He doesn't, and no line of sight to it. So I think Elon is getting frustrated that their delays are a lot of man-made, and he's saying this is bullshit, this whole myth about people can be just as productive at home. Elon's saying that's not true. We definitely see a huge productivity bump when people come back to the office. So someone asked him on a podcast, aren't you afraid that a lot of Tesla employees are going to quit by you? He's saying not just, Google said you're going to take less money if you work remote. Apple's saying we're on a pilot 3 days in the office. Elon's like 40 hours a week in the production facility, in the office. And when he was asked, what if they leave? He said they can go pretend to work somewhere else. So he's all but saying people that are remote are just pretending to work. They're not actually accomplishing shit. And frankly, I agree with him. In a company like his, where you manufacture things, where you invent things, you can't do that remotely. You and I can run a podcast remote, but no one would accuse you and I of working or producing anything. We're just on here talking, right? We're not building anything. You can't do what Tesla's doing in an economy. And that's just one more bullet point that people thinking they're in control in the employee-employer relationship, that's changing very fast.
So to become a CEO of a major company, you've got to be really good, like really good. The 10th highest paid CEO last year. Now, some of this is going to be through stocks and actually selling some of your stocks, right? But the 10th highest paid was $240 million. The highest paid was Elon Musk at like 24 billion, but a lot of it's through stock options. But the point is, like, that's generational money. So if you are going to be there long enough to get that kind of a paycheck, you have to have shareholder value. We talked about this earlier, right? So what comes down to shareholder value is earnings. It's all driven by earnings, and then ultimately it goes to stock price. Stock price becomes options, and options become comp. And in order to get there, these people are competitive, smart people whose wives want, beachfront houses in Palm Beach. So the way for them to get them is they need to stay. And in order for them to stay, they have to preserve profit, and they need to do all of those things first. So another thing that just posted today is Microsoft lowers fourth quarter guidance, citing unfavorable foreign exchange rates. Like, the signs are everywhere. When you talk to people, intelligent people are all saying, okay, it's coming. It's coming. Like, I think Ian Mind's point of this is, we talk about this all the time. It's coming. If your financial house is not in order, do it. You probably have another 6 months to really be aggressive and get it in order. And be honest, like, the best thing you can possibly do is be in order. So, like, personally, I've told Ian this, like, when the water comes in, like, where do you want to hit? Do you want to not touch your feet? Do you want to be at your ankles? Do you want to be at your knees? Do you need a snorkel? Like, I don't want to have a snorkel, and I don't want it at my chest. Like, I want to be, I don't want to feel it, or I want to be able to capitalize. So I just left a meeting a few minutes ago that I'm coming back from with a private lender in Richmond. He emailed me a few weeks ago and said, hey, I'm foreclosing on this. So the meeting I had is, hey, if you foreclose on more, this is what we do. And I was a couple minutes late because I drove him and showed him some of the stuff on Westwood. And I showed him it because I want him to know that, hey, we're capable of bigger scope projects. Like, we can do apartments, we can do singles, we can do all kinds of stuff. And if you find yourself in a situation where you have to foreclose on something, we can help you add value and bring it to market. Why? Because he's going to have to foreclose. It's already starting. And in a recession, I want things with no risk. If he's the bank and he's carrying the asset and I don't have to buy it, there's no risk. So, like, we're already starting to see these things and get ahead of it. And I'm not as smart as any of the people on this list that are making this much money, because I'm not. So what I'm telling you is these people are thinking at this level. So I think it's just, filed into evidence under example triple Q of it's coming.
So I think the last point that I wanted to bring up on this episode, just of glaring signs that we're seeing that really rough times are ahead. So I'm right now in the market for venture capital funds. So venture capital, it's a step beyond angel investing. So angel investing is just you're helping someone out who's small business on their first round. Venture capital is normally in the millions of dollars for businesses that are valued at $5 to $30 million. And normally you're kind of pre-revenue for venture capital. So private equity, there's revenue, there's capital, there's a business involved. Venture capital is normally taking a risk on an idea and a founder before they've started earning any revenue or profits. So we're there with our car alarm company, with Keep, and I've been studying a lot of the market because we're going to have to go out and talk to them soon enough. So there's a lot of interesting stuff going on in venture capital. In the last, let's call it 2 years, there's been more than $330 billion poured into US-based startups. And that amount is double what was a record amount in 2020. So venture funds poured $330 billion in, which was double the record of 2020. Just for that, that's last year.
Just for clarity, that's an annual number, 330 billion in 2021.
That's
which
last
is
year.
double what was 2020.
It's last year. So a record doubled on top of a record. And that was during a time where everyone is now admitting the valuations were stupid. They were like, if you think tech stocks were overpriced and they all got crushed, those are publicly traded companies with real revenue. Startups were overpriced even more because they didn't have any revenue. They were just ideas. One of the largest and fastest growing venture capital firms is a firm called Tiger Global. And this will interest you, Frank. So Tiger Global made their name in growing, and they made their name by revolutionizing the way venture capital is done. Okay, so you're going to laugh. Stop me if you heard this before in mortgage lending.
They have an incredible app. It's going to revolutionize the business. We're not really a home builder. It's our platform.
We're not a venture capital firm. We're a technology firm that does venture capital, right? You've heard that before, right? We're not a real estate firm. We're a tech firm that does real estate. Okay, sweet. So Tiger Global what their claim to fame was, they could underwrite a deal faster than anyone else. And with less of the hassles, with less of the expenses, we'll make a decision much faster. Kind of sound like Countrywide Mortgage to you 15 years ago. Fast and easy loans. We don't underwrite, stated. They were doing all kinds of deals. And I've been listening to venture capital podcasts for the last year and a half, and people are lamenting that how's Tiger Global doing these deals? They're doing deals in like a week on a handshake. And just how are they doing any due diligence? Do you remember what I told you when I lost my first commercial deal and some New York REIT did it without any diligence? They're like, we'll waive due diligence. We'll just wire the money and do it. And I was like, I told you, and you're like, you lost, you're out. Like you can't, that'll bankrupt you if there's something wrong or hairy. And it's the same thing. Tiger Global shook up the industry by just not paying attention. And they had all these junior level people out looking for deals that have never been through a recession. So here's the interesting thing. Tiger Global just came out and said they took a $17 billion loss in their hedge fund, 17 billion with a B in their hedge fund. And they have raised two of their biggest rounds ever. Their biggest round early last year was 6.7 billion venture capital. Then they went out 6 months later and doubled that. They did 12.7 billion. Here's the wild thing. They've already committed all of those raises to just threw it out there to all these people. And now they're taking all these huge losses. And so right at a time, Andreessen is another really big, Andreessen Horowitz is one of the biggest venture capital firms. And Mark Andreessen, by the way, he started Netscape, one of the original web servers. So they just came out, they did a poll of all of their startups that they've invested in. More than half of them are laying people off. More than half of all of Andreessen's startups are laying people off. And so the reason why I'm just sharing some of this is Frank just went to a real estate conference where every a-hole got up and said, soft landing coming, everything's cool, no recession, things are fine. Well, real estate is on the very, very ass end of the economy. It's not liquid, it's slow, it takes debt. People don't just sell houses when things go bad. It's normally the last shoe to kind of drop. I'm seeing, because I'm on the front end with a startup that I've invested in and I'm responsible for raising more money on, I'm seeing venture capital drying up on the very front end. So this is like the nose of the dog sniffing around is startups and venture capital. And it is getting obliterated. It is an absolute scorched earth. VC firms are panicking that they're going to lose money. They're retrenching. They're not raising any more money. They're showing losses to their investors. I'm seeing that on the front end. And when startups are going through all of that, that means there's going to be a massive redeployment of human capital. So, if all of those businesses weren't great ideas, that means that there's a really inefficient use of human capital. Because if you take a really smart engineer and he's working on a really dumb idea, that's a poor use of capital for the American economy. And there's a whole change that's going to have to take place with a lot of those people getting displaced. Where are they going to land? Where are they going to go? So there'll be new winners emerging, but there's going to be a 12-month ugly period we go through where a lot of people aren't working.
It's kind of like getting 16 base runners and only scoring 3 runs. It's very hard to fathom. Very hard to fathom.
Too soon, bro. Too soon. Too soon.
So as you're having this conversation, I'm once again looking at CNBC because I think it's relevant.
You are doing some amazing half-ass research on the fly for this.
In real time.
Yeah.
The good news is when it has to do with CNBC and breaking news, it's look at his research, not me fucking off. But Tiger Global drops 14% in May during the tech sell-off, pushing hedge funds 2022 losses over 50%. We've got some sweet real estate to invest in here in Richmond, Virginia, folks. Strong returns.
Have you ever talked to a hedge fund sales guy? Have you ever talked to a hedge fund sales guy?
Yeah, I'm doing it right now.
Okay, so they're hilarious. So they talk to you for different things. They want your assets. For me, they want my money. They want me to move my money from something to give it to them.
Right.
They have this spiel that they tell you, a hedge fund, right? We hedge bets. we can make you money in an up market and a down market.
There's
And
always a bull.
bullshit.
There's always a bull market, and it's our job to find it.
Oh, it's such bullshit. They tell you that in any market we can make money and we're perfectly hedged so that you will always make money until there's a bad economy, and then they always lose their ass just like everyone else. And they normally lose 2 and 3 times as much as if you just put it in the S&P 500. It's such a bullshit line.
So there's 2 things there that I think are fascinating, right? The first one is this: that person who told you they're incredibly well hedged gets fired, and you call them and their fucking phone doesn't answer, that number's been disconnected. That's one. 2, this is why Warren Buffett says, don't give your money to a hedge fund, just buy an ETF tied to the S&P and you'll outperform them, because it's a bunch of crap. They're like, it all comes down to hubris and ego. And what I think is really, like, if you said, Frankie, wrap up this episode for me, the market is giving us signals and signs. One of my favorite books, I've talked about it here a bunch, This Time is Different. It isn't different. It's the same stuff. We've been seeing it for 8 centuries. If you track it, Ray Dalio came out and said the same thing recently. They're signs. Things are happening. If you have hubris and you have an ability to act and preserve capital, now's the time to do it. We might be early. We might be completely wrong. But if we're not, now's a great time to have it.
Yeah, so I am, I'll tell you a few things I'm doing right now, because I believe this is just the beginning of a long recession. Maybe not a long recession, but we're just starting something that's going to be kind of an ugly period of the economy. And it's definitely going to be a recession. I am taking every single consulting opportunity I can right now, and I'm pushing for more. So I'm selling my ass off right now to lock
which
up.
Which is a shift from a few weeks ago. Like a few weeks ago, you were saying no.
I was saying no because I was like, our all-star tournament's coming up and I got a lot of stuff going on with Keep. But now I'm kind of like, you know what? I'm going to take, so I'm pushing right now. I'm for a 6-figure training package with a whole bunch of managers, which can be time consuming for me. And I'm going to take that money and just put it in the bank. And I'm not going to put it in stocks. I'm not going to put it in real estate. I'm just going to load it up on cash, because it's like, look, if my asset values are all going to come down, the one thing I can control is I can just go earn more. So I'm just going to go try to get as much earning as I can this year. I'm going to get it. And I'm also leaning a lot closer to, if I get another stupid offer on one of my collision centers, on my commercial properties, I'm just going to take it. And I'm just going to let that money sit in cash. And
pay the taxes. That's it.
Watch. Pay the taxes, whatever. I'm not going to do a 1031. If I get another one, I just got an email yesterday from some guy out in Texas who has a buyer that wants to buy Gerber collisions, and they want to make an LOI to me. I'm going to look at it really hard. And if it's a fat deal, I'm just going to quit being a pig and say, go ahead and give it to me. And I'm going to let that money sit in cash. I'll pay my taxes.
So I want to say something real quick. What, just ballpark it. If you sold that thing, ballpark it, what are you going to make?
So let's take the Gerber one. I paid $3 million for that. I think I could get an offer for 4.2.
Okay, so stop there. You're gonna make roughly $1 million. When we were kids, that was hitting the fucking lottery. Yeah. That's a lottery. $1 million was a lottery ticket. Like, oh my God, I got a lottery ticket. You bought it smart, but you've owned it for what? How many years?
4 years. Well, the other cool thing about that is I've made close to $250,000 a year on that property and rent without any expenses. So I've already made $1 million on it. And I can make another $1 million, and I could take all that money and just put it in cash. And the only reason I'm not really doing it is I like making $250,000 a year on it. And I got some debt on it, so that money pays the debt down. The interest, I got write-offs on it. It's
a really good decision, and it's a really good conversation to have with yourself over what would I rather be? What would I rather be? Would I rather be liquid? You don't have a real job. Like you do this with me, it doesn't pay. So like you have to look at these types of things. Like, what would I rather have? Would I rather have an annuity where they might come back and try and renegotiate your rent like you did during coronavirus? Or would you rather have the cash? And these are decisions that you need to be having with yourself if you're not. Like Ian and I are having them because this is not our first rodeo.
But I think, so we're not unlike Walmart. We're not unlike Amazon. So Frankie and I are doing a real estate deal, and one of the properties that is in the real estate deal, we raised $4.5 million for it, and we took out some debt. But from our pro forma to what it would cost now, it's almost double. Like, those expenses are real. But
And the cost of capital. I pro formed at 1 point higher than I had placed one of the other parts of the deal, a whole 100 basis points, which is a lot. And I'm under market by like 250 basis points. So what that means in English, it's not going to cash flow the same. So like a conversation I had with Ian the other day is, hey, I haven't come to this decision yet, but I'm thinking about it.
Yeah. So, but when we did that deal, we thought about, okay, we might hold it for 10 years. If this happens in the market, we'll cash flow, it'll be great. And we'll have this many tenants. We could sell a few of the units. And one of the options though, was this, Frank had thought through this. If the economy goes to shit and all of my expenses go up and this thing just doesn't work, I can sell this. I can go do the project. It's still a lot better than what we paid for because it's an old building, and I'll quick flip it. And that's something I'll do. That was one, this is not like the situation we're going through. We thought about it. We thought about all the negative things that could possibly happen. However unrealistic it felt at the time that 2022 would be this, we still thought about it. And we said, well, what happens if that happens? And the answer was, well, we'll sell it way faster. So Frank and I are looking at right now of, if we could get that done and get an offer and still make some money on that and take that piece of the real estate off of our books, would we do it? And we both said, yeah, hell yeah, we'd do that. And we'd go look for another deal at today's realities that would pro forma based on the more negative environment we're in. So for us, knowing this is probably a longer recession and not a soft landing like everyone's saying, we might be a little more prone to say, let's get that risk asset off our books. Let's just get it off our books and take what the market gives us today.
So there was a guy that Ian and I both worked with. I won't mention him, but Ian and I both thought he was a tremendous dildo, like just an absolute dildo.
That doesn't narrow it down. We thought that way about a lot of people we worked with.
It's the truth, but that's why I said it that way. So like any of our loyal listeners that know this person,
they couldn't narrow it down because like Ian and Frank thought most people they worked with were tremendous dildos.
we think each other's a dildo. So
that's
it's
true.
Like,
it's true, including me.
It's a universal.
Frank felt this way about me.
But in 2005 or 6, this dildo went to a meeting, and the meeting was with our CEO, who Ian talked about, who became the chairman, but he was still the CEO at the time. And the CEO used the term soft landing, like he counted it. It was like in like an hour and a half meeting, he used it almost 70 times. I still remember this. 2008 to 2012 was not a soft landing. That was a fucking plane crash. That is not
into the side of a mountain, into the side of a mountain plane crash. There was no landing in the ocean. We hit a mountain.
Whatever was an abrupt end to that flight, it happened. And he used the term soft landing like more than 60 times in an hour meeting. So when I went to this real estate conference a couple weeks ago, everyone talked about a soft landing. And all I could think about was, it isn't soft. But the thing to talk about is this. That meeting happened in 2005 or 2006. The market told you in 2008 through 2012, it was super bumpy. There were warning signs. There's warning signs. I might be wrong. We might not go into a recession. It might be perfect. But I'd rather be super secure and not lose than have more on the table at risk. And that's what Ian and I are talking about. That the CEOs of these big companies, they can't be at risk because they'll lose their jobs. So you've got to be very mindful of where you're going. And you've got to be, like, depending on where you are in your career, where you work, what your situation is, you need to be really good, you need to be really liquid, you need to be with a great company. These are things that you should look at and think about, which I think was the whole point of why we talked about this during this episode.
And I think it's important, especially with your money, with your career, with what you're planning to do with your time over the next 5 years. It's important to pay attention to what these big companies are going through and what they're saying they're going to do, and to have the awareness to think about what are the ramifications of these big companies having to make tough decisions, and how does it bang its way all the way down to our level and the things that we're doing, because it will impact. There is no soft landing. Like when these big titans of industry are struggling and their stocks are down 50%, they're going to make some really tough decisions that impact thousands of companies, millions of people, and it will reverberate all around the economy. You have to pay attention to it, and you have to think, how long is it going to take for that to work its way into the things I'm invested in and into my job? So I think we're going to be in a period where it is more of an employer's market than employees market over the next couple of years. I think we're going to be in a period where it's going to be really choppy on all investments, and you've got to be smart about keeping enough capital and cash available and work your ass off and save money. This is not the time to be spending on a bunch of stupid stuff. Save money, put money away. You're going to wish you had more cash.
So Ian and I are of the age where these movies matter to us. So like what happens? So right now there's early warning signs. Ian and I are talking about the last downturn. I'm going to go back to the late 70s, early 80s. If you go back and watch the movie Back to School, Revenge of the Nerds, Breakfast Club, pick another, Pretty in Pink, Sweet 16, there's a bunch of those, right? Those rom-coms and those
Weird
things.
Science.
But Weird Science doesn't really talk about this, but all those other ones do. They all mention the economy in the movie. Why? Because it'd been a shitty economy for 4 or 5 years. And when they wrote those scripts, that was what's happening. So it manifests into things that are just like, it happens in the movie.
Stripes.
All of it. But these movies, like it becomes part of the script because it's happening around you. And right now it's early. It's not being talked about in movies. But if you go back to the last recession and you look at company men and some of these things where people lost tons and tons of jobs or margin call, like it happens and it makes its way. But it doesn't start with the movies. It gets to the movies. This is the early part of the scene. This is what dictates what we'll be watching on television and in movie theaters going forward. But it's starting to happen now. But that's the process. It starts in the news. Big CEOs who are smarter than us, that have more data, are telling us these things. And it makes its way all the way to the day you're eating Milk Duds and popcorn and watching it.
Yep. I think that's a great way to finish. Anytime we can finish with 80s movies, that's a pretty fantastic ending.
Do you want me to tell you how Top Gun Maverick ends?
No, you son of a bitch. Don't do that. Don't do that. All right, Frankie, are you going to go smoke some weed now that this is over? Are you going to go eat some gummies?
That's for you, pal.
Okay, that's cool. That's cool. That makes sense. I don't have employees to face the rest of the day.
Correct.
Hey, brother.
Good
Great
talking to you.
episode, man. Great episode. Protect yourself.
I
out there.
agree.
Hey, be safe out there. Be safe out there.
You too.
See you, bro.